GDP equals C plus I plus G plus X minus M. This is what's known as the national economic identity, and it looks like a formula, but it is truly an identity. And this will help to explain how this entire house of cards economy that the United States has built and has thrived on is at the brink of collapse. And every single dollar that we add to the national debt or that we deficit spend, while it's required to continue the house of cards, is also the exact same thing which might make the whole thing collapse. So let's get right into it. As always, my name is Derek. I got my degree in finance, so you don't have to. First, let's break down this identity. Now, what this is the expenditure approach to calculating GDP. What this means is that GDP equals consumer spending plus private investment plus government spending plus exports minus imports, which is net exports. And the reason for this is because every dollar spent is someone else's or another entity's dollar earned. So the totality of GDP can be calculated as the total expenditures. Now, this identity also has ramifications when it comes to the trade deficit. I've talked about this before, probably close to a year ago, when we were dealing with the major tariff issues. But to clarify this, because it's important for this video, X minus M is net exports. In the case of the United States, this is actually a negative number because we have a trade deficit. Now, I'm going to make an argument here that might sound counterintuitive. A trade deficit actually benefits our GDP. Now, you might look at this identity and say, well, that's not the case because this is a drag on GDP. If this number is negative, it actually lowers GDP. And that is technically true. But this is where we can start to describe how the US has grown and why this exact same thing, the same engine that's making it grow, is also the main risk here. And that is because the United States GDP growth relies on C plus I plus G. And when consumer consumption and business investment are not enough to stimulate growth in GDP, what picks up the slack? That's the G portion of this identity, and that is government spending. That is the budget deficit. Now, the trade deficit and the budget deficit are not the same thing, but the trade deficit allows us to budget deficit spend. I'll explain to you why. And this is even an argument as to why we might want a trade deficit. Although, yes, it does export manufacturing jobs overseas, it allows us to do one very important thing for the U.S. economy, at least when we're talking on a broad sense. And that is, when we buy more than we sell, when it comes to goods, because remember, we do have a services surplus, but when it comes to goods, we buy more than we sell. What this means is we receive product and we send over the counter to that product, which is US dollars. When you send US dollars overseas to foreign companies, to foreign individuals, and to foreign governments, that means that overseas, all over the world, there is a surplus of US dollars. Where are US dollars good to spend? They're good to spend primarily in the United States. So that foreign supply of US dollars usually flows back into the United States, either A, as foreign investment into treasury debt, or foreign investment into the economy, both of which prop up GDP and allow the government, especially when it comes to foreign investment into treasuries, it allows the government to continue to deficit spend. So yes, while exports minus imports, when that number ends up as a trade deficit, that is a drag on this national economic identity. The benefit is that it also props up the G portion of this identity, which is government spending. So once again, when private spending or consumer consumption is not enough to push up the GDP, the government can step in, it can deficit spend, and it can prop up this GDP growth. The problem is the growing and growing and growing government debt. We're approaching $40 trillion when it comes to the total national debt of the United States. And what this means is that every single dollar of the G portion of this identity becomes less and less useful or powerful or effective. And that is because a higher and higher percentage of the G portion of this identity is spent not on stimulating the economy, but on simply paying back interest on the borrowed money. So, of course, what can the Federal Reserve do? Well, it can suppress borrowing rates by keeping the FFR low, the federal funds rate. The problem with that is, of course, when you do that for long periods of time, you increase inflation. And when inflation increases, you have to raise the FFR to suppress inflation. When you suppress inflation by raising the FFR, borrowing costs, including those for the government, goes up. And they go up with a higher borrowing debt base. So what you end up with is a feedback loop or a downward spiral where you need to keep spending on the government side. You need to keep feeding the G portion of this national economic identity, but doing exactly that adds to the national debt base and makes each one of those G dollars that are being spent less and less effective. So now when you put this entire thing together, we need GDP to continue to increase, so stocks continue to go up, so asset values continue to go up, so you and I and everybody else, not just the very, very wealthy, just everybody in general can one day retire. You need that to continue moving up. That happens when GDP goes up. Now, if you cannot do that organically through innovation, through new products like we've done in the past, in the Industrial Revolution, in the tech boom, and maybe the next one is artificial intelligence, but so far, the revenue that's generated based on the investment is nowhere near enough to be the next boom. Maybe that changes, but until we see that, we have to rely on the G portion of this GDP identity to be able to prop up this whole thing. But at the same time, spending more and more in the G portion of this makes the debt base higher and makes more of those dollars become spent on simply servicing the debt. And that's where you lead to today. You end up in a point where we are going to spend over $1 trillion on interest payments alone this year on servicing the national debt. On top of that, you have mandatory spending. That means Social Security. That means Medicare, Medicaid. That means VA benefits. Mandatory spending that has to be spent. It eats up the entirety of the budget. So if we want to do anything to spur the economy, we have to borrow money as a nation, further adding to this negative feedback loop or downward spiral. So, in economic terms, I say the economy is about to collapse. Luckily for you and for me, giant economies like the United States, they move very slowly. So, about to collapse doesn't mean tomorrow. But it does mean potentially in 10 years, potentially in 20 years, if nothing changes. And for the majority of you who are watching this right now, that means that will directly affect either your life and your livelihood, or your children's lives and their livelihood, or your grandchildren. Somebody is going to have to foot the bill for this house of cards that we've built. It's either going to be you and me, or it's going to be our children, if nothing changes. That's all I have for you today. If this video was blunt, to the point, informative, if you learned something, if you took something away from it, please consider subscribing. It is difficult to grow here on YouTube, so I genuinely mean this from the bottom of my heart. Every subscription means the world to me, and I appreciate it. If you like personal finance, world economics, and investing, as well as thought-provoking videos like this, you're in the right place. That is all we do on this channel. Now, these videos are supposed to be weekly, but they're like every other day at this point, and that's because we live in a crazy economic world, and there's always something changing or happening, which means I will always do my best to bring that to you and keep you informed. So with that said, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. I will see you in the next one, which I'm sure will be very soon. Until then, take care.